welcome to the next lesson in our journey through the Major Arcana. In this lesson we will be looking at cards number 2 and 3, the first two female figures within the Major Arcana, the High Priestess and the Empress. We're going to deal first with the High Priestess, card number 2, and you can see here she is in the Waitsmith deck. So we have the High Priestess on a throne. She's dressed in very sort of flowing and watery looking robes, which are a combination of blue and white. She's wearing a very specific headdress in this card. This headdress represents the 3 phases of the moon. You can see the 2 horns to represent the waxing and waning phase, and then in the centre of the disc representing the full moon. She sat between 2 pillars, a black pillar and a white pillar. One little detail, if you wonder what the letters on those pillars are, they actually are sort of approximations in our alphabet of the Hebrew letters that were supposedly on the pillars of the 2 temples, the 2 pillars, sorry, in the Temple of Jerusalem. The black and white pillars in this case represent duality, light and dark, good and bad, whichever kind of dualities anyway. Between the pillars, strung between the pillars and behind the High Priestess is a veil. And you can see that it's embroidered very finely in a mixture of palm fronds and pomegranates. Look very closely, those pomegranates are arranged to approximate the shape of the Kabbalistic tree of life and the 10 spheres in that tree. What else can we say about her? Yeah, she's at her feet is a crescent moon. So I take that as a representative of the lunar aspect of, you know, it's a symbol of femininity, maybe the sort of spiritual side of femininity. The moon is very much a symbol of governing female cycles, and you could tie that in very much with the pomegranates in the veil behind her. They have connotations of obviously female cycles, female genitalia. Now, if you look very closely beyond the veil, you can see hints of what looks like a seascape. So obviously with the High Priestess we're very much in the realm of water, and also whether this is a lake or a sea, I see it very much as a depiction of the unconscious. So there's a lot of symbolism in this card. I interpret this card as a gateway to the unknown. I see her as the guardian of the unknown. And if I'm going to specifically interpret the lake or the sea behind this, that is very much the unconscious for me. She is, in effect, the archetype of female spirituality. Let's kind of just recap our journey so far. With the Fool, we had the archetype of creation, of being, and also, you know, in personal terms, the ability to experience the world, to experience reality, to taste of truth, you know, the truth of being. We also had that whole thing of the Fool as the truth sayer with immunity. Then we moved on to the Magician, and the Magician was the transformer, you know, the ability to transform reality. She takes us one step further. She stands at the doorway between reality and higher reality, you know. Well, she sits, she's enthroned at that doorway, that gateway. If you think about, not specifically female spirituality, but feminine spirituality in, you know, in a wider sense, it's not the sort of rules, regulations and traditions of holy books. This is the higher realms and the realms of divinity as we perceive them intuitively. That's what she guards, you know, that's what she sits at the gateway to. The veil very specifically represents the fact that, you know, this is a hidden reality. You know, we don't see it with our normal five senses. We can only perceive it intuitively. And I think the fact that this veil is embroidered with pomegranates, it very much puts, you know, it puts that into the sort of realm of, you know, feminine perceptions, aka the intuition, you know, second sight, the third eye. You know, it's not, this is the kind of higher reality that we, you know, we can't rationalize, you know, we can't quantify, you know, we just have to perceive it intuitively. And obviously, you know, it's something that has to be perceived experientially, but in that way that is beyond our sort of conventional senses. What else does she represent? I would say she represents chastity. You know, there is, it's a paradox here. You know, she represents the higher feminine, but then as a priestess, she probably represents chastity. She represents virginity. Yeah, she is the spiritual rather than the physical or carnal side of the feminine nature. Very, very powerful image. Think of feminine spirituality in all of its sort of manifestations through the ages. You know, she's the seer, she's the witch woman, she is the benevolent priestess, the visionary, the intuitive. This is, you know, this is this is the archetype of very powerful second sight, that ability to see above and beyond our conventional reality. And that's what's hinted at behind her veil, you know, that sort of semi-revealed but mostly concealed landscape beyond our normal world. I think when she appears in a reading, she does very much represent that principle of the world being so much bigger than we can see. You know, it's so much bigger than the world as we can quantify it rationally. You know, when the High Priestess appears in a reading, you know, you're into that sort of whole principle of, you know, there potentially being other higher dimensions, multiple possibilities. You know, everything about this card shows those higher realities and how we sort of begin to touch them and interact with them. So yeah, it's kind of difficult, I find, with the Major Arcana to talk specifically about reversals or the light, you know, the light side or the dark side. Let's have a look at some of the other cards and the way this archetype has been depicted in earlier and later decks, and then we can maybe look at that. She's very different when we go back to the earliest decks, because, you know, here once again we have the 15th century Visconti deck. We see a female pope, specifically in this deck. This deck was painted for the noble Visconti family in 15th century Italy. It actually depicts on here one of the Visconti ancestors who basically set herself up as the female pontiff of a particular breakaway sect. So the figure is in traditional papal vestments, the three-tiered papal crown. She holds a scepter, which is crowned by a cross. And incidentally, despite the kind of Isis-like headdress on the Waite-Smith priestess, you can also see that she has a cross on her breast. So there is a kind of multi-faith, multi-spiritual aspect about this that you don't see in these earlier depictions. In fact, what we have here is, I mean, with the pillars we see Judaism, with the headdress we kind of see Egyptian spirituality, with the cross we see Christianity. So, and actually you could argue that with the moon you're being taken back to sort of much earlier sort of pagan nature-based religions. So there's a lot of different spiritualities going on here. I think the point is that the point is still made in this card. I mean, when this was painted, within the culture it was painted, you have, a framework of Christianity, or at least Gnostic Christianity, and that's, she is in effect the priestess of that. You have within this, there is the dark side of this, because of course you could argue that this represents heretical spirituality. But then again, so much feminine spirituality over the ages, genuine, positive feminine spirituality over the ages, has been demeaned and demonized by the patriarchy. So, that's, the whole question of authentic or heretical, quite frankly, is, is not, it's not black and white. So that's the Visconti Popess, as she would have been referred, or Papess, as she would have been referred to. Moving a little bit further forward, that archetype is still there within the sort of later Marseille woodcut decks, but she's not necessarily the Visconti ancestor. I think this is probably, and a lot of people think, a lot of scholars think, this archetype is probably based on the legend of the Pope Joan. Again, there is a legend of a female papal usurper, a woman who dared to be pope, masqueraded as a man, and was only found out when she gave birth. So this card, by now we do have numbering and text on these cards, and you can see she's numbered 2 in Roman numerals, referred to as La Papesse, the Popess. You can see the beginnings of the veil behind her, sort of forerunner to the veil that we see in the Waite-Smith tradition. She is holding an open sacred text, which is interesting. She holds those sacred keys, but at the same time her book is open. So that gives a sense that this is knowledge that can be freely accessed, if you approach her. This isn't a closed book, unlike the Visconti Popess, the Papess of a sect, where the book is closed. So you kind of have more of a sense of Gnostic spirituality that, is more difficult to access, maybe has to be accessed through initiation. So there we have it. That is the Marseille Popess. An interesting variation when we look at the Swiss 1JJ deck. I mean, this is a 19th century deck, but it is based on earlier variations of the Marseille deck. Certain Catholic territories took offence to the inclusion of the Pope and the Popess within the Arcana of the Tarot deck, so they replaced them, ironically, with pagan gods and goddesses. So it does seem a little bit illogical that you replace one profanity or heresy with another, but there you go. In these kind of decks that are referred to as Besançon decks, the Popess or the priestess is replaced with the Greco-Roman goddess Juno. You can see her there with her peacock. So if you're using a deck like this, I think you kind of have to make your own judgments. Obviously, you're out of the realms of the, the Guardian and the, you're out of the, how can I put it? You're out of the sort of range of the priestess, who obviously is a keeper of, of spiritual tradition, into the realms of a divinity herself. I think the one parallel I can draw with this is, she is an archetype of female divinity, but obviously it's a lot more direct, than with the Popess or the priestess. So that's an interesting variation. Not a very frequent one, but in some decks you will find that figure replacing the Popess or the priestess. We're moving forward now into the realm of the Golden Dawn tradition of tarot, so we're sort of early 20th century. This is, when you see this, I mean, this is a modern depiction of, the Golden Dawn symbolism, but when you see this, we're kind of much nearer into the realms of the Waite-Smith. You can see 2 veils here, one behind, one in front. They're kind of semi-transparent. I would say revealing and yet concealing at the same time. So you kind of, like with the, between the pillars and the veil in the Waite-Smith, you get these tantalizing glimpses. That will be the same with these semi-transparent veils. It's a theme that you see repeated in the Thoth Tarot, which we'll see in a minute. The priestess is holding a cup. So again, that very much symbolises, that's the cup is the symbol of the element of water. So we're very much in the realm of the feminine here. Water is a feminine element. So yeah, we're now sort of dealing with the occult tarot, where the symbolism is more esoteric, and these cards obviously would have their uses in ritual magic as well as for divination, which is primarily what we're primarily dealing with divination more than the sort of ritual magic uses of these cards. So moving to the Thoth card, she's referred to plainly as the priestess rather than the high priestess. This is a very complex and beautiful image. Again, she's revealed and yet partially concealed. She's kind of behind these somewhat misty veils made up of projective geometry patterns. You can see that she's crowned with the three-phase moon, as well as with the a similar headdress to the Waite-Smith priestess. Interestingly, whereas the Waite-Smith priestess holds a rolled up scroll inscribed Torah, which is very much tying it to sort of Judaic revelation, the Thoth priestess has an unrolled scroll across her knees. So this ties her very much, for me, to what we see in the Marseille tradition, where the book is open. So, this is not knowledge that is hidden or privileged, but it kind of takes courage to go up to that throne and to step beyond the veils. Very interesting depiction. So, to sum up with the High Priestess, she is the archetype of female and feminine spirituality as experienced in the human condition. She is the archetype of guarded secrets, of revelations, there is very much that sort of paradox of revealed and concealed. Maybe that's what we'll kind of view as her reversal. Upright, I would say spiritual revelation, maybe spiritual concealment, or if we're in the reverse, maybe we are into the realms of the sort of spiritual misguidance or heresy, or all of those things. They're all possibilities within this archetype. I think if this card appears in a reading, it does show that very much your circumstances are probably not quite what they seem. The influences on what's going on are probably much bigger and unseen. It encourages you to look at the world in a much broader perspective, and not just to rely on your physical senses or your rational understanding. So yeah, I would say that is how to view her in a reading. And yeah, I think that's probably about all I can say for the time being. Again, these are my musings, my meditations. This is the understanding I've built up of the cards. This image over the time that I've worked with the deck. Hopefully these sharings will be springboards for you to build your own interpretations and insights. And obviously, what I'm saying is by no means exhaustive. It's only the beginning. Okay, so let's move on to card number 3, the Empress. And here we are. Number 3 in Roman numerals. Just something else to mention incidentally. All of the decks I've got here, I mean, with the exception of the Visconti, which doesn't have numbers, all of my decks, bar one, are using Roman numerals. A lot of modern decks will just use standard Arabic numbering. Again, it's a preference. I love the kind of antiquity of the Roman numerals, and but then see, like with this Golden Dawn deck, we just have standard numbering. When you're choosing a deck, just go for whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay, so this is a wonderful figure, very, very fruitful. This is the archetype of female physicality and fertility, I would say. She is enthroned, and this is a very lush throne. I mean, look at the depth of those cushions. You know, this is not some hard austere throne. This is cushions. This is rich embroidered upholstery. We've got lots of reds and oranges. Just at the foot of the throne, you can see a shield. Now, in this instance, on the rider deck, we have the symbol for Venus here. So she's very much tied into Venus, the goddess of love. She is dressed in a white robe, very elaborately embroidered with what looks like, I would say, pomegranates again. Pardon the glasses, by the way. Anyone who knows me will know this eccentricity. Yeah, I think they're pomegranates again. It's very richly embroidered. She is crowned with an equally lavish crown. The base of the crown looks like a laurel wreath, but then the top is gold, and there are 12 stars in that crown. So that crown is very significant. The 12 stars tie her into the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 months, the 12 phases of the moon. So you're talking a card of cycles. So again, what is then implied is the female cycle and female fertility. So whereas we were dealing with a very austere, virginal, spiritual femininity in the High Priestess, we're dealing with a very earthy, fertile, physical femininity within the Empress. She is in effect the principle of female embodiment, female fertility, female fruitfulness. So we can see that, I mean, she's surrounded by a verdant forest. We can see a waterfall and a stream just to her right. And in the foreground, a rich harvest. You can see, you know, sort of ripe wheat. So, yeah. So that's the Rider-Waite-Smith Empress. There's something similar in the Thoth deck, but interestingly, with a slightly different emphasis. You can see waxing and waning moons on the left and right hand side. So again, that's tying into the female monthly cycle, perhaps. Her shield shows, what can we say about the shield? The shield is similar to some of the older decks in that it shows eagles, I think, but it shows what looks like eagles kissing or mating, perhaps. You can also see a swan nestling chicks at her feet as well. So again, this is very much a symbol of motherhood, you know, which is a very important part of, you know, of female physicality and fertility. Yeah, it's a very rich, very verdant, but also slightly watery image as well. Her crown, if you look on this, actually looks quite similar to the Waite-Smith priestesses. You know, you've got the horns for the moon, but then when you look at the centre, the crown contains an orb with a cross. So this is, again, it's tying it very much to the earth. So again, it's quite an esoteric image, but it's the same principle. You know, we're talking sort of earthy femininity, you know, the sort of procreative power of the female body. Very, very powerful. So, I mean, you could tie her in with goddesses such as the goddess Demeter, you know, in Greek mythology, you know, figures like that. Obviously, the Waite-Smith ties her in with the figure of Venus. I'm going to work backwards with these because the Golden Dawn figure is very similar. Interestingly, she is, you see the 12-starred crown. She's holding an ankh, but she's also holding in her other hand a scepter with an orb on top of it. So, I mean, again, the orb has connotations of the planet Earth. So we are very much into the realms of the Earth Mother and Gaia, I would say, with this archetype. She also is wearing the symbol of Venus around her neck. 12 stars in her crown again. Very powerful. Now let's look at some of the earlier depictions. They may not have the kind of Gaian fertility symbolism in them, but you're more in the earlier decks into the realm of, you know, the archetype of female authority. Now this is interesting because, I mean, she's always been denoted as the Empress, and that is what's shown, but that is in a strange way in Western culture, and certainly in Western Renaissance culture, that's a kind of, it's an oddity. You know, if we go back to sort of Greco-Roman culture, I mean, there would always be emperors. There wouldn't be an empress, you know. That's a figure that didn't exist. So ironically, there's a sort of kind of feminism in these cards, which I love. The kind of defiant feminism of the Pope Joan or the Popess daring to usurp a patriarchal figure, which I think is gloriously rebellious. And actually, maybe that's something that we should consider in these two cards. You know, the possibility that they are also archetypes of rebellion and rebalance. You know, she is holding a shield which is emblazoned with an eagle. So, I mean, that's very much, you know, you're into the realms of divinely gifted authority there. She's crowned, and she has, let's just have a look. It's difficult to see sometimes with these cards because they're on a gold background. Yeah, she has just a plain scepter. So there you have the Visconti Empress. As I say, bit of a contradiction in terms, because maybe that was the fun of the card game. You know, it's kind of poking at authority, and actually, if it's patriarchy, it needs to be poked at, still does. Similar thing again in the Marseille deck, but you see the scepter is crowned with an orb, you know, giving her earthly authority this time. Again, you've got the eagle emblazoned shield. You know, there aren't the fertility connotations here. That's sort of a later development. But I think we can still, you know, if we're reading with these decks, we can still read that in. We can read it backwards, because obviously the whole point of tarot is that I think it's good to honour, you know, the traditions in these cards, but I think we can also use our own intuition and add our own layers of meaning. That's ultimately what these later deck creators have done. Certainly what Waite did, what Crowley did, what the Golden Dawn did. And wonderful. You know, long may it reign. Because they enhance our understanding of these figures, I think. So there you have the Marseille figure. And again, nothing much different in the Swiss 1 JJ deck. No shield, incidentally, on this. That's something I haven't noticed before. She has the scepter, she has the crown and the throne, but no shield. But yeah, she's not referred to as a queen. She's referred to as the Empress. So that sets her over and above the queens of the Minor Arcana. You know, I think it gives her a sort of more archetypal feel. You know, the queens are, you know, very specifically rulers of an earthly realm, whereas, you know, once we're into this figure, it is very much the principle of female rule, female authority, but also matriarchy, fertility, female embodiment, fruitfulness, all of those wonderful things. So there we have it. Those are our next two cards in the Major Arcana. In the next lesson, we will be looking at card number 4, the Emperor, and card number 5, the Hierophant. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this lesson and found it helpful, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel to find out when I share new videos or go live. You can also find me on Instagram at Chris Butler Artist, on Twitter at Butler Tarot, and on Facebook at The Sacred Tarot. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.